February 24, 1971 began like any other day in Portland, Oregon. The winter air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and exhaust through the city's streets. Travelers bustled through the Portland International Airport, hurrying past ticket counters and gift shops, unaware that among them walked a man who would etch his name into criminal history. He was calm, unassuming, dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and thin black tie. His neatly combed hair and the briefcase he carried suggested a businessman, the kind of passenger flight attendants smiled at politely but seldom noticed. The man's eyes, hidden behind sunglasses even indoors, scanned the terminal with quiet intent. There was a precision to his movements, each step measured, each gesture controlled. He did not linger at the gate or engage in casual conversation. Instead, he appeared to be waiting for something, or someone, but no one could say who or what. People around him shuffled by, absorbed in their schedules, unaware that this ordinary-looking man would soon challenge law enforcement, aviation security, and the very concept of a crime's limits. When he boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, headed to Seattle, his calm exterior masked a mind calculating every detail. The flight was short, a routine hop across the Pacific Northwest, carrying around 36 passengers and a handful of crew. Among them, a young flight attendant moved down the aisle, checking tickets and offering smiles. The man caught her attention not because of any outlandish behavior, but because of his quiet confidence. He chose a seat in the middle of the cabin, tucked away yet commanding the space with subtle authority. Once seated, he removed a small brown paper bag and ordered a bourbon and soda. His voice was even, polite, betraying nothing. Passengers exchanged polite glances. A few were intrigued by the calm, collected stranger. Little did they know, the serene atmosphere of the cabin was about to shatter. As the plane ascended, the soft hum of engines and the occasional clatter of beverage carts created a familiar comfort for the passengers. Some flipped through magazines, others napped, while a few chatted quietly. Then, the man reached into his briefcase, producing a small folded note. He handed it discreetly to the flight attendant seated nearby, asking her to read it carefully. She unfolded the note, her eyes scanning its contents. The message was simple, but terrifying. He claimed to have a bomb and would use it if his demands were not met. Her stomach sank. She looked up at the man, whose calm, polite expression remained unchanged. There was no panic in his eyes, only resolve. He repeated, quietly, that the note must be taken seriously. Panic rippled through the cabin. Passengers clutched armrests and whispered nervously. Some tried to peer at him, hoping to read a clue from his face, but the man remained unreadable. The flight attendant, trained in protocol, but shaken nonetheless, moved to alert the pilot. Over the intercom, the captain received the information and immediately contacted air traffic control. The clock began ticking on what would become one of the most audacious crimes in American history. Despite the fear, Cooper's composure never faltered. He spoke to the flight attendant in calm, measured tones, instructing her to relay his demands to the authorities. He requested $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel stop in Seattle. It was a sum enormous enough to make him wealthy, yet not so high as to provoke immediate suspicion of impossibility. There was method in his madness, a careful calculation that ensured both compliance and opportunity. As negotiations began on the ground, Cooper maintained a commanding presence aboard the aircraft. He walked the aisles, checking in with passengers, offering polite reassurances. "Remain seated," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "Everything will be fine if you follow instructions." His words, calm yet authoritative, prevented hysteria from spreading. By the time the plane descended toward Seattle, the tension was a taut wire, but it did not snap. Meanwhile, the story of D.B. Cooper began to take shape outside the aircraft. Law enforcement scrambled to assemble the ransom, hastily coordinating cash and parachutes. Airport officials and FBI agents watched the situation unfold, astonished at the audacity of the hijacker. How could a man so seemingly ordinary orchestrate such a precise, high-stakes crime? Across the nation, media outlets would later replay the events of that afternoon as an unbelievable tale of nerve and cunning. Inside the plane, Cooper prepared for what would come next. He reviewed the parachutes, ensuring the equipment was in perfect order. Every movement was calculated, every glance intentional. The audience senses a meticulous mind at work, a man who has planned every detail, yet leaves room for improvisation. He was a master of control, manipulating fear without ever succumbing to it himself. As the passengers disembarked for the refueling stop, Cooper maintained his calm demeanor. He watched the crew handle the exchange of cash and parachutes with precision, ensuring no mistakes would jeopardize his plan. The tension in the cabin was mirrored by the tension outside. Police and FBI agents moved frantically, uncertain how to respond to a situation that seemed equal parts audacious and impossible. Throughout this part of the story, the audience experiences a dual tension, the immediate danger inside the plane and the broader suspense of law enforcement racing against time. Cooper becomes a character both terrifying and fascinating, a figure whose nerve and planning elevate the narrative beyond a mere crime story into a psychological thriller. As the plane prepares to take off again, the final moments of Part 1 are heavy with anticipation. Passengers are tense, the crew alert, and the audience knows that the true climax, the daring escape into the night, has yet to come. Cooper's calm, precise movements, his quiet authority, and the palpable fear of those around him set the stage for a story that will continue to grip, puzzle, and haunt viewers for decades. By the end of this section, the story has firmly established the stakes, introduced a compelling central figure, and created suspense that will carry the audience into Part 2, where the negotiation escalates and the daring escape becomes a reality. The stage is set, the characters are defined, and the tension is at a boiling point, every element necessary to keep viewers hooked and eagerly anticipating what happens next. The refueling stop in Seattle was a whirlwind of tension, strategy, and calculated movements. Airport personnel scrambled to assemble the ransom, $200,000 in crisp, unmarked bills, while the FBI coordinated the logistics of supplying 4 parachutes. No one had ever dealt with a situation like this before. Hijackings were rare, and yet here was a man who seemed perfectly composed, walking the aisles of a commercial airliner as though he were conducting a business meeting. Cooper's calm confidence contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding outside the aircraft. The passengers, still shaken but reassured by his quiet authority, remained seated. He moved deliberately, checking that each parachute was properly packed, that the bags of cash were intact, and that the flight crew was following his instructions precisely. There was a methodical elegance to his preparation, an almost surgical attention to detail. It was clear he had planned for contingencies, yet the air of unpredictability lingered. Once the cash and parachutes were brought aboard, Cooper instructed the flight attendant to tally the items and confirm they matched his demands. Her hands trembled slightly as she counted, but Cooper's calm voice kept her focused. "Everything will be fine," he said, almost as if repeating it to himself as well as to her. The tension in the cabin was palpable, each moment dragging as passengers and crew alike wondered if they were about to witness a miracle or a tragedy. The plane's engines roared back to life, lifting the aircraft into the gray, overcast sky once again. The weather outside mirrored the uncertainty inside. Rain fell in fine sheets, clouds obscured the mountains, and a gusty wind whipped around the Pacific Northwest landscape. It was the perfect cloak for someone planning an escape that would soon become legendary. Cooper's instructions were precise. The plane would fly at a lower altitude and slower speed, just the conditions he needed. As the passengers glanced nervously out the windows, Cooper moved to the rear of the plane. He instructed the crew on the use of the rear stairway, making sure the cabin was ready for his daring exit. Every movement was measured. Every action reinforced his control over a situation that could have spiraled into chaos at any second. The audience feels the tension rising, knowing that what comes next will be audacious, terrifying, and unforgettable. Cooper's mind was focused on timing, physics, and risk. He understood that jumping from a commercial airliner was not simply a matter of leaping into the night. Altitude, airspeed, weather, and terrain all played crucial roles. He had studied maps, perhaps even practiced parachuting in secret. Every detail had been calculated with meticulous precision. The suspense grows because the audience knows how dangerous this act is, yet Cooper's calm exterior never wavers. Meanwhile, law enforcement tracked the plane from the ground, monitoring every movement, yet powerless to predict the moment Cooper would act. Inside, passengers shifted nervously in their seats, whispering in hushed tones. No one could see what lay ahead. No one could anticipate the audacity about to unfold. The crew prepared the cabin, unsure of what exactly would happen, yet obeying the calm, quiet authority of the man who had seized control of their flight. And then the moment arrived. Cooper moved to the rear stairway, opening the small door that led to the outside. The wind tore at his coat, the rain stung his face, and the roar of the engines created a deafening chorus of sound. Yet, despite the storm and the danger, he stepped out into the void, his parachute secured, his nerves steady, his plan set in motion. The passengers could see only shadows and the churning clouds outside. There was a sudden hush in the cabin, a collective intake of breath, and then the realization: he had jumped. Cooper had disappeared into the night, leaving behind nothing but the hum of the plane and a stunned, silent crew. The audience experiences the same shock, the same disbelief, as history itself seems to hold its breath. The FBI and airport authorities immediately initiated a manhunt. Helicopters combed the skies, searchlights pierced the darkness, and teams of agents fanned out across the rugged forests below. Yet, even with every resource available, Cooper's trail vanished almost instantly. He had planned not only the jump, but the disappearance, using the natural cover of darkness, rain, and dense wilderness to erase himself from the map. As the plane continued its journey, the passengers processed what had just occurred. Some were terrified, others in awe of the man who had orchestrated such a daring escape. Flight attendants, trained for emergencies but never for the impossible, struggled to comprehend the audacity of the act. Cooper's presence lingered in the cabin even after he was gone, a ghostly reminder of the nerve and cunning required to pull off such a feat. Outside, news of the hijacking began to spread. Media outlets scrambled to verify the story, each new bulletin heightening the national fascination. The figure of D.B. Cooper began to take shape in the public imagination, a calm, mysterious man who had executed a perfect crime in broad daylight and vanished into the night. The narrative blurs the lines between heroism and criminality, leaving the audience to grapple with a figure both terrifying and mesmerizing. The aftermath of the jump is shrouded in mystery. Cooper's exact landing point remains unknown. Did he survive the stormy conditions? Did he escape into the forests? Or was he lost to the elements? The story teases the audience with possibilities, never revealing the full truth, which enhances the suspense and ensures that curiosity drives the narrative forward. In the days that followed, the FBI poured resources into the investigation. They interviewed passengers and crew, scoured the wilderness, and examined every piece of evidence recovered. Yet the trail remained cold. All that existed of D.B. Cooper was a legend in motion, a shadow that had stepped out of an airliner and into the collective imagination of the nation. Part 2 closes with Cooper's disappearance complete, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. The tension between reality and myth is established. The narrative promises that the story will delve deeper into the investigation, the manhunt, and the theories that have kept D.B. Cooper alive in public consciousness for decades. Suspense is maintained, curiosity is piqued, and the legend grows with every unanswered question. By the end of this part, the audience has experienced the thrill of the negotiation, the precision of Cooper's planning, and the daring escape into darkness. They are ready to follow the investigation into the forests, the rivers, and the endless speculation that will define the mystery of America's most infamous Skyjacker. The morning after the daring jump, the forests of the Pacific Northwest lay cloaked in mist and mystery, as if the land itself were hiding secrets. Below the plane's flight path, law enforcement scrambled to locate D.B. Cooper, a man who had vanished into the night without a trace. Helicopters circled overhead, searchlights cutting through the fog, while ground teams fanned out across the dense, rain-soaked wilderness. The trees, thick with evergreens and underbrush, were an impenetrable maze. Every footstep into the forest was a battle against cold, mud, and the unknown. The FBI had never faced a case like this. Cooper had disappeared from a commercial aircraft in full view of the crew, yet no trace of him could be found. Agents examined every possible landing site, every stretch of river, every clearing that could have concealed a parachutist. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. Each lead promised hope, only to vanish into dead ends. Footprints in the mud, a crumpled branch, a parachute sighting. Each clue brought a momentary surge of adrenaline, followed by crushing disappointment. Meanwhile, the legend of Cooper began to grow. Newspapers ran bold headlines. Skyjacker vanishes into storm. The perfect crime? Who is D.B. Cooper? The public was captivated by the audacity of a man who had hijacked a plane, demanded ransom, and leapt into darkness without leaving a trace. Was he a criminal mastermind, a military veteran, or merely an ordinary man whose nerve and preparation had allowed him to pull off a feat no one thought possible? Investigators began piecing together a profile. He was meticulous, confident, and highly intelligent. Cooper had handled the plane, the passengers, and the crew with astonishing composure. He had planned for contingencies, yet allowed for unpredictability. The calmness with which he approached the hijacking suggested experience, perhaps military, perhaps law enforcement training. Or perhaps he was just a man who had studied the mechanics of flight, wind, and survival to an extraordinary degree. The FBI theorized endlessly, analyzing his choice of clothing, his demeanor, even his accent, in a desperate attempt to uncover his identity. Theories proliferated in the media and among amateur sleuths. Some believed Cooper had landed safely and disappeared into the wilderness, living out the rest of his life as a shadowy figure unknown to the world. Others speculated that he had perished in the jump, his body swallowed by the unforgiving forests and rivers. Some argued he had carefully buried part of the ransom to retrieve later. A few bills were eventually found years afterward along the Columbia River, sparking renewed speculation, but never definitive proof. Every clue was tantalizing and frustrating in equal measure. As weeks turned to months, investigators expanded the search radius. They interviewed hundreds of possible suspects, examined thousands of tips, and even explored international leads. Yet Cooper's trail was ghostly. The forests, hills, and rivers remained silent witnesses to the greatest vanishing act in American criminal history. The case became not only a search for a man, but a chase for an idea, the audacious criminal who defied law, logic, and geography in one brilliant stroke. The public fascination added another layer to the story. Cooper became a symbol of daring, ingenuity, and mystery. People speculated about his personality, his motives, even his potential future plans. In bars and diners, in offices and classrooms, Americans whispered about the man who had outsmarted authorities and disappeared into legend. The FBI received hundreds of letters from people claiming to have information, and every new tip rekindled the hope of solving the case. Yet no lead produced the certainty anyone sought. The discovered bundle of cash along the Columbia River, years later, only deepened the mystery. Investigators could not determine whether it had been lost during the jump, intentionally buried, or left as a deliberate clue. Its presence proved Cooper had been real, had touched the money, and had vanished, but it revealed nothing about his fate or identity. This fragmentary evidence ensured that the story remained a puzzle for decades, simultaneously tantalizing and maddening. The manhunt also revealed the limitations of law enforcement at the time. Aviation security in the early 1970s was minimal compared to modern standards. Metal detectors were not widely used, passenger screening was lax, and hijackings were considered rare and almost theatrical events. Cooper exploited this gap perfectly, using knowledge, timing, and courage to achieve a feat that would seem impossible today.
For the FBI, the case became a frustrating lesson in human ingenuity versus procedural limits. Beyond the official investigation, the legend of D.B. Cooper permeated culture. Movies, books, and songs immortalized him, portraying him alternately as a daring rogue, a mysterious anti-hero, and a criminal genius. Each retelling emphasized the tension, the audacity, and the unsolvable nature of the crime. The myth of Cooper grew larger than the man himself, turning him into a cultural icon whose story would be told for generations. Yet, despite the fascination, Cooper remained elusive. Every supposed sighting was questioned, every confession doubted. He became a ghost, a figure who existed in theory and imagination, but whose reality could never be fully grasped. The audience experiences this tension. The more we know, the more we realize how little we truly know. Every clue adds complexity. Every theory deepens the mystery. Part 3 ends with the audience caught in the dual thrill of investigation and imagination. The search for Cooper continues without resolution, leaving viewers immersed in suspense, wondering whether the man survived, how he managed the jump, and what became of him afterward. The manhunt, the evidence, and the speculation create a rich tapestry of intrigue, setting the stage for Part 4, the enduring legacy of D.B. Cooper, a mystery that refuses to die. By this point, the audience is emotionally invested in both the man and the legend. They feel the frustration of law enforcement, the excitement of potential clues, and the thrill of contemplating the audacious crime itself. The story's suspense is sustained through unanswered questions, partial evidence, and the tantalizing possibility that Cooper may have outsmarted everyone, leaving a trail of wonder and speculation for decades to come.
Years turned into decades, yet the name D.B. Cooper continued to echo across the Pacific Northwest and far beyond. Newspapers, television programs, and countless books kept the mystery alive, each retelling adding a new layer to the legend. For the FBI, what had once been a high-stakes manhunt became a case study in frustration. How does one catch a man who seemingly disappeared into thin air? How does one chase a ghost in the forests, rivers, and mountains of the Pacific Northwest? For the public, Cooper became more than a criminal. He became a symbol of daring and cunning. Stories circulated of his calm demeanor, his meticulous planning, and the nerve required to jump from a commercial airliner into the stormy night. In bars, offices, and classrooms, Americans whispered about the Skyjacker who had pulled off the impossible. He was simultaneously admired, feared, and envied, an enigma that refused to be solved. In the world of law enforcement, Cooper's disappearance remained a profound challenge. The FBI pursued leads for years, examining thousands of tips, interviewing potential suspects, and analyzing every shred of evidence. Yet no definitive identification was ever made. The trail of D.B. Cooper ended abruptly after his legendary leap, leaving investigators with nothing but speculation, scattered bills found years later along the Columbia River, and the haunting knowledge that the man they sought might have simply vanished without a trace. The discovery of those bills in 1980 fueled renewed interest in the case. Some investigators believed it confirmed that Cooper had survived the jump, carefully stashing a portion of the ransom and disappearing into the wilderness. Others argued it was evidence that he had perished, leaving fragments of his daring plan behind as the only trace of his existence. Either way, the money became a physical symbol of the mystery, a clue that teased the imagination but provided no real answers. Cultural fascination with Cooper grew alongside the investigation. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians found inspiration in the story of the calm, calculated man who had defied the law and vanished into legend. Movies portrayed him as a shadowy anti-hero. Books debated every possible identity, motive, and outcome. Songs immortalized his jump, celebrating his audacity and the thrill of his escape. Even today, nearly half a century later, D.B. Cooper is a figure that sparks curiosity, debate, and awe. The case also highlighted the gaps in aviation security of the era. Hijackings were rare, and airport screenings were minimal. Metal detectors were not widespread, and airline staff were trained to handle passengers politely rather than confront threats. Cooper's plan exploited these weaknesses flawlessly, demonstrating both cunning and an understanding of human behavior. His calm demeanor prevented panic in the cabin and gave him complete control over the situation, proving that a single individual with enough preparation and nerve could outwit even the most established systems. Despite the fascination, Cooper's fate remains unknown. Some theories suggest he lived a quiet life under a false identity, perhaps blending seamlessly into small-town America or even moving overseas.
Others claim he perished in the wilderness, his body claimed by rivers, forests, or the harsh winter terrain. Each theory has supporters and skeptics, but none provide definitive proof. This unresolved tension is part of what continues to captivate audiences. The mystery is not just about a crime, but about human ingenuity, risk, and the tantalizing possibility of disappearing completely. Public fascination also spawned amateur sleuths, treasure hunters, and investigators who pored over old FBI reports, maps, and clues. They analyzed the weather on the night of the jump, the flight path, and the terrain. Some claimed to have discovered footprints, abandoned gear, or other evidence. Others speculated that Cooper's survival depended on a network of collaborators waiting to help him disappear. Each new theory renewed interest in a story that never truly ended, keeping Cooper alive in the collective imagination. Decades after the hijacking, the FBI officially closed the case in 2016, acknowledging that Cooper had eluded capture and that the mystery of his identity remained unsolved. Yet closure did not diminish the legend. For many, the story of D.B. Cooper is less about justice and more about the thrill of the impossible. It is the story of a man who walked into a commercial airliner and with calm nerves, intellect, and courage, stepped into history, literally disappearing from the map. The legend of D.B. Cooper is also psychological. He represents the allure of audacity and the thrill of risk. His story challenges the conventional understanding of crime and law enforcement. How could one man, seemingly ordinary, orchestrate such a complex act? How could he vanish so completely? These questions continue to fascinate because they tap into a universal curiosity, the desire to know, to understand, and to imagine the limits of human daring. For the passengers of Flight 305, the incident left lasting impressions. Some recounted their terror, others their awe. Flight attendants and pilots carried the memory of Cooper's calm authority and meticulous planning, yet even they could not solve the riddle of his disappearance. The story of that flight became part of folklore, a tale passed down in aviation circles and true crime communities alike. In the end, the legend of D.B. Cooper endures not because of the crime itself, but because of the questions it leaves unanswered. The audacity of the hijacking, the perfection of the escape, and the mystery of his fate combined to create a story that captivates generations. He became an icon of cleverness, courage, and the unknown, a man who refused to be caught, a shadow that continues to haunt forests, rivers, and imaginations alike. The story closes on a haunting cinematic note, a lone figure disappearing into the darkness, rain streaking across a parachute as it flutters into the night, leaving behind only whispers of awe and terror. The forests are silent, the rivers calm, yet the legend is anything but still. D.B. Cooper may have vanished physically, but he remains omnipresent in the cultural consciousness, a reminder that some mysteries are designed never to be solved. As viewers reflect on the tale, they are left with an enduring sense of suspense, curiosity, and wonder. Cooper's story is a testament to the power of ingenuity, the audacity of risk, and the allure of the unsolvable. Decades later, people still ask the same questions. Who was D.B. Cooper? Where did he go? Did he survive, or did he become one with the night? And therein lies the true power of the legend. The questions themselves are the story.